everybody. Craig here from the Casino Business Podcast and Casino Marketing University, and we have got a very special guest today, Oliver Lovat. He's the Managing Director of Denstone, REA Consultants, and a visiting faculty member of the newly named City University of London Business School. So, Oliver, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, we connected through our mutual friend, Dr. David Schwartz at UNLV. And I was out there, let's see, it was about 2 years ago. And then we first met. And when I'm like, oh, I'm about to meet Oliver, I looked you up on LinkedIn. And you have so many great articles. I've been bugging you about doing an interview for a while because you just dive deep into casino history in a way that I don't think I haven't found other people really do it. Actually, I mean, Dr. Dave does a great job. He's got awesome books you guys checked out. But your articles are just like mini deep dives where you look at, the finance, the marketing, the history, the characters that made Vegas and made the casino industry. I love it. So before we get into that, why don't we talk about how did you get to Vegas? Because obviously, anybody that's listening to you knows you're not originally from Las Vegas.
No, I'm Scottish originally, and I lived in London for 15 years. And I kind of fell into gaming and casinos by accident. So like a lot of people, when we were in our 20s, we visited Las Vegas, thought it was a great place. We're wowed by the spectacle of how the Mirage existed, of the Bellagio, of these properties. And I came back and I said to my dad, I want to live in Las Vegas. And he said, it's not a place for a nice middle-class Scottish boy to live. So I stuck it on the back burner and continued, in the real world. And I found myself working in real estate, originally residential development, and then retail development and pan-European deals. But Vegas never went away. It was always, we'd visit it, and it was always in the background, and it was a great place. And I gave a lot of thought to these buildings out here, because when you're developing a shopping mall, you're building effectively a big box, putting little barriers in it and leasing it out to tenants. Where a casino is far more interesting because the traditional model, everything was operated vertically. So whether it was the coffee shop, the gift shop, or the restaurants, the casino operator ran the whole thing. And so that vertical model versus a horizontal model was something of interest. So I went back in 2010 and did an MBA. When I was 33, and you have to write a thesis in the UK. And I decided to write my thesis on strategic competitive advantage within Las Vegas casino resorts. Why is it, effectively, that people go back or choose particular resorts? Is it the theme? Is it the design? What is it that makes people go back? And can we apply those lessons into, non-gaming real estate? So I started working on this, and I discovered that what we think is a business model for a casino as the same thing. You realize that different companies have got very different business models. So, for example, the Sands that just sold the Venetian have one business model. Caesars, or Harrah's as it was then, had a different business model, MGM Wynn, etc., etc. So I started looking at the business models and the drivers for competitive advantage, and I wrote my thesis. And Dave Schwartz asked me if I could publish it, and I said of course. And then I got invited to G2E, and I came and spoke to the casino industry about what they did, even though I was still doing commercial real estate in the UK. And then about 6 years ago, I'd been working on a couple of casino transactions by then. I thought, let's give it a shot. Let's cross the Atlantic and come over here.
So you came over. Did you have a consulting gig that kind of bridged the gap? You're like, all right, I'm making the jump. I'm going to figure it out once I get there.
You know what? I trust my own ability to always generate business. So I had nothing. I had a visa and a plane ticket and a family. So we came out to Las Vegas, and thankfully it's been a very positive move. And what's interesting is it's given me the opportunity to parlay some of the thinking that I'd done about this industry to Las Vegas? Because you mentioned it before. When I started researching and writing about the business history of Las Vegas, there really isn't much scholarly work done on the business history. So, Dave does phenomenal writing about the history, but he's not really, he doesn't really write about, the financing, the historical financing of casinos, for example, or, some of the business and strategic decisions that were made. So I set about, since I've been here, trying to rectify that by meeting people, talking to them, and understanding their strategies. I also teach a class. So when I finished my MBA, the business school asked me if I could teach a class on, competitive strategy, which is, ultimately what this market's about. And I'll talk more about it later on, and I'm sure we'll deep dive into that subject. And I said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. I'll teach a class, but I want to bring students to Las Vegas. And the faculty board was a little bit reticent, but ultimately, when one makes the case for Las Vegas and why it is such an important city to study, they relented, and we've brought about 450 MBA students from all over the world studying at what was CAS, now City University, to Las Vegas to study the business models.
What a great way to immerse them in that. What's cool about the different business models in Vegas is they are so tangible and in your face. You can look at different business models in the cereal aisle or something. It's like, see, this one has slightly lower calories and this one has, brighter colors. Whereas in Vegas, it's like, see, this one has a pirate ship that's shooting cannons, and this one has, $1 million piece of art everywhere. And that's so cool. So do you have like a couple highlights from when the business school comes out? Any like go-to big examples that you always point out?
Yeah. So the first thing, you have to understand the thesis. And the thesis is the casinos on the Las Vegas Strip and Fremont, or anywhere in the country, are selling the same product at the same price, at the same time, to the same people, in the same place. The same game of blackjack you play at Circus Circus for $10 is exactly the same game of blackjack that you play at the Venetian for $10. Right? The games, give or take some tweakings on the odds, they're the same games.
Mm-hmm.
So, the historic argument was, let's try and differentiate our product by theming our hotels, by doing different forms of entertainment. And what you find is they work, but they're not strategic, they're tactical. So in entertainment, let's say you're Frank Sinatra and the Sands, you fall out with the management of the Sands, you go to Caesar's Palace. So if you've built your strategy around Frank Sinatra playing at the Sands and he goes elsewhere, you have a strategic problem.
Mm-hmm.
So what I discovered in my research was there's only two drivers for strategic competitive advantage within the casino industry. Number one is location. And if you're already built, you can't move it. Number two is customer loyalty. And what we have learned when we analyze it, that there's different types of customer and there's different types of loyalty. And what motivates one person may not motivate another. So we have to develop loyalty platforms strategically to target the only one thing that is differentiatable, and that is the customer. The only thing you can differentiate strategically is your customer. So who is your customer? What are their needs? How do we give them to them? And that's the thesis. So if you look, for example, at the Venetian, when it was built, and going back 20 something years, it was a convention driven hotel. That hotel was built first and foremost for conventioneers. Yes, they put in some escapist elements, but ultimately it was based on function. How close are you to the convention center? How big are your rooms? Can you get restaurants? That groups want to dine in. So that was the customer need, and the Venetian developed a functional response. Do conventioneers want to go to buffets? No. So they didn't put in a buffet, which at the time was shocking. If you go to the Wynn business model, their customers, as Steve Wynn once said on a conference call, are rich folk, right? So you have to give what rich folk want. And that is everything from aspirational loyalty by creating an environment that makes people feel good about themselves. So it's not necessarily based on function, it's based on aspiration. The use of brands to develop a tribal or emotional loyalty is something which Caesars have done very well, particularly with celebrity chefs. And again, the transactional loyalty comes into play by players' cards, which of course is something that you know a lot about. But not everybody is driven by players' cards. You know, I can tell you that some of the best players, the biggest players, don't know what a player's card is. You think a guy playing $125,000 a hand is going to find his player's card before he plays it?
So how much is driven, like when these casinos come up with the different themes? Because you talked about like Venetian, and Sheldon Adelson, before he built Venetian, was just an expert in the convention business, right? He ran conventions, and he said, "All right, I'm gonna vertically integrate," to use a term used earlier. The convention, I'm gonna own the hotel, I'm gonna own the convention center, I'm gonna own the restaurants, and obviously, like he personally sounds like crafted that business model, and Wynn, maybe in a lot of respects, like knew that upper market very well, just instinctually, or from his experience with Golden Nugget. I mean, how much of these casinos that have done really well are just driven by a smart entrepreneur that crafted a good vision versus, can a corporation set themselves apart in a similar way?
Yeah. So give you an example. When Adelson knew that customer well, he knew the convention customer intimately, so he could make the decisions based on those customer needs. The genius of Wynn and Jay Sarno before him is he understood the needs of wealthy gamblers and to create those emotional needs in a way that casino operators beforehand hadn't done. What they understood the psychology of the gaming customer and developed high-end properties, laterally high-end properties to elicit an emotional response. Now, if you take the two other giants, Caesars and MGM, they run the full range of customers. So their responses are much more analytical and data-driven. And that's one of the things that we teach on the MBA program, and I studied extensively, was Gary Loveman, who ran Harrah's and which became Caesars before El Dorado bought it, was a Harvard professor who was a data scientist. And the players' clubs gave information about the customers, and then they could make management decisions based on those customers, their profiles, and to understand what their needs were. So, for example, if you're a customer and you like Julio Iglesias, right? If they have a large amount of Hispanic customers and they want to attract them on a particular weekend, they would book that artist and then watch the amount of people who would come. So it was very analytical. You could measure. And I always remember, I used to teach a class at another university on property performance measurement and asset management. And one of my professors said to me, in order to manage, you need to measure. And Caesars and MGM, to a very large extent, use the data that comes from those player cards to manage the entire company. So it's not as intuitive as some of the management of a single property where you can focus the entire entity around the customer. At Caesars and MGM, you see those customers segmented, the marketing off specific for those customers, and to an extent, the casinos are aimed at those customers. So what we see is, from a real estate point of view, the casinos that MGM own are effectively marketing tools, right? So you attract different customers to stay in those properties based on those preferences.
And so I guess looking at MGM's portfolio or Caesar's portfolio, it sounds, because Caesars, right? You mentioned Jay Sarno earlier, the guy that came up with Caesar's Palace. So like the marquee brand in Caesars was kind of created by a visionary, and then maybe Paris, Planet Hollywood, all those. I'm not exactly sure who created. You may know
Right.
the themes, but maybe those big companies sounds like they kind of visionaries may have created these initial brands and then they purchased them and optimized them. Maybe City Center, Aria, would that be? Because
Well,
with MGM,
well,
it's right. You got
well,
Bellagio, you got Mirage, that were
so I'm gonna
new.
ask. I'm gonna answer your question with another question, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you a little story first of all.
Okay.
And this one's not in the books. So when I wrote an essay on the history of Caesar's Palace, I had the opportunity to sit down with Stan Mallon, who's still alive, and he was Jay Sarno's business partner on Caesar's Palace. So there was Sarno, Mallon, and Nate Jacobson came in, as property president, and then they built Circus. But Stan told me the story. They'd already built the Cabana hotels. That was their brand, the Cabana. And they built one in Palo Alto, they built one in Dallas, and they built one in Atlanta. And they decided to come to Las Vegas and build the big Cabana, the Cabana Palace. And that was the working name for the property was the Cabana Palace. And they went to Rome to buy statues to go on the driveway and around the property. And they were looking at sites around Rome, and they just decided they were not going to call it the Cabana Palace anymore. And they came back to everyone and said, we've decided to change the project name. It's going to be called Hadrian's Villa. And that didn't last. And they mulled it over and then came up with Caesar's Palace. Huh. So Desert Palace was the original trading name of the company. Cabana Palace was the working name of the model, and it ended up at Caesar's Palace. And there was another question I was going to ask. So the question about casino brands. How many brands do you think have got brand equity on the strip? If you were to change the name of the property to something else, how would it affect it? So let's say now that at Wynn, now the Mrs. and Mr. Wynn are involved anymore on a day-to-day level, and I think the largest holder may be Galaxy Casinos out in Macau. If the Wynn were to rebrand as Galaxy, would it make a difference?
I mean, to me, I think yes. I think the Wynn name has brand, but that's one person's perspective. I don't know the data behind it.
So the Venetian and Paris, they're not their own brands. They're cities, right? The hotels have pinched the brands from. There's no brand equity in Paris and the Venetian. They don't belong to those hotels. MGM is a movie brand, right? Kokori bought the movie studio and he wanted an entertainment product, so he stuck an entertainment brand. And now the hotels and the company's probably more famous than the movie studio still, or maybe not. So how much brand equity belongs to that company with MGM and their properties? I think you've maybe got Caesar's Palace. You've maybe got the Strat, because the Strat, bizarrely enough, is very identifiable with a lot of brand equity behind it. Maybe the Mirage.
Yeah.
So how important is a brand when it comes to the properties?
And when you say a brand, because I mean, I guess the brand Paris, you're right. I mean, I don't know how much equity there is behind that if you name Paris, Las Vegas, something else. But yeah, Wynn Las Vegas, I think people that have been to Vegas, they know the experience they can expect at Wynn, the quality. Same with, the Cosmo has, I think it's carved out a nice brand for itself, just kind of the experience you can expect there. So, that's a good question about how you would measure the value of the brand equity. I don't know. What do you think?
So here's the question. So I wrote a piece on this a couple of years ago, looking at research. Do you know what the most recognizable casino brand is in America?
Is it Caesars?
No, it's MGM.
Oh, okay.
Second is Hard Rock.
Huh.
Third is Planet Hollywood. right? The reason why, because these are brands that have got nothing to do with casinos. They are popular culture brands that have been adopted by casino resorts. So if you want to attract a particular type of customer to your property, the use of the brand is a great way of trying to grab the attention of somebody, but they're not staying in that property, I think, because of the brand particularly.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, because you could slap Coca-Cola on a casino on the strip and be like, that's the most recognizable strip casino in the world. Well, do I want to stay at the Coca-Cola casino? And I don't think so. I'd rather stay at the Wynn. So, yeah, brand. Yeah, for casino, it's more it's more of experience, right? Like, what
Correct.
experience can I expect? What kind of level of service, the quality of down to the towels. And I remember touring Wynn, walking around with you, either Wynn or the Encore, but you were just pointing out like just random chandeliers that you're like, you look at that, that's like a $5 million chandelier. Look closely. You notice like just the level of detail that is in the Wynn.
Yes. And that was always Steve Wynn's thing. People that know, and they like to feel appreciated, that the operator is not seeking to exploit them. And that's the other question I say to people as well when you go into a property. How do you feel? How does this environment make you feel? So what I do as a development guy in Las Vegas, one of my things is, how do we make our customers feel? And you get a lot of people who are, I mean, my background is real estate development and finance. I'm a finance guy. So there's not a lot of finance guys like me who look at this industry from a customer centric point of view, especially on things like emotion and marketing. When you walk into the Wynn, so let's look at 4 properties which are positioned for similar customers. Let's go for Wynn, Caesar's Palace, Aria, and Cosmopolitan. Each one of those properties are great properties, but each one make you feel something different when you walk inside them. So what is the emotional response to the environment that we have created? Because you gotta remember, it's the same product, it's the same blackjack, the rooms are all lovely, the restaurants are all great, but how do they make you feel when you go in them?
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's because right now, Fremont Street, right? You got Derek Stevens, who seems like the new, great mind, great entrepreneur in the casino business that's created Circa, which I haven't been to yet, but have you been there yet?
Yep. Yeah. It's great.
I wonder if, I guess I didn't phrase it as a question, it was more kind of rambling, but the big corporations, I wonder if is it possible to come up with an iconic brand that has like just equity from the experience without a visionary to kind of lay the groundwork to craft it, like, because Caesars, Harrah's acquired all these Caesars and bolts-on companies, and they're great at optimizing what they have. But I wonder if, like, could MGM have created the Bellagio if Steve Wynn hadn't had that vision and taken chances? Like, I want to have a giant lake in the beginning, even though it's super valuable real estate. It's, I don't know if it's possible to do something great without a visionary.
No, of course it is. I think of course it is, because all these companies now have got really talented, smart people working in them. Caesars, MGM, there's some really great people working in these companies who understand gaming. But the key thing is you have to understand who the customer that you're building this property is for. Mm-hmm. Okay, it might not be for you. It might be for someone else. And let's look at, for example, 2 properties over the generations. Let's look at Excalibur. Okay, dollar in, dollar out, probably the most profitable casino ever built in Las Vegas.
Wow.
Okay, and it opened within months of the Mirage at a fraction of the price and made more money on the bottom line than the Mirage did. Bill Bennett and Bill Pennington, who ran Circus Enterprises, which built Excalibur, they'd been running Circus for 20 odd years before they built the Excalibur. They knew everything about that customer. right? They knew what they wanted to eat. So when Excalibur opened, the customer wasn't the same person that was staying at the Mirage or staying at the Rio, which opened within a short time as well. They were bolt on that customer. It opened as the largest hotel in the world with 4,000 rooms. And it's just been a very profitable property ever since. The location works. They know who the customer is. The customers that go there know they're going to get a good deal when they go there. They understood those customer needs. Let's flip that and let's go to Cosmo. One of the great things, if you're a developer, right, in Las Vegas, you have to understand, yes, the customer, but also the competition. So when the Cosmopolitan guys who are building it ended up with that project, they had to try and find unmet demand. Mm-hmm. So who could they position that property to who was not currently catered for? And again, this is 10 years ago now. So they effectively, when we use the brand, they wouldn't use this, but we do. It's called the segment is urban elites. People that live in major cities that want good things, that identify with high-end brands within those properties, that want something that they just can't get anywhere else. They don't want Louis Vuitton. They'd rather have something more authentic in a smaller, like a niche corner bag, for example. And they programmed the food and beverage and they programmed the experience for those urban elites. And guess what? Urban elites came. There were two problems with this. Number one, historically, urban elites haven't been gamblers. So they found a customer, but the customer wasn't a known and recognized gambler. But that takes time. So the research says, it tells us, research that I've done, published by the UNLV, which you can find on my website, after a person under the age of 40 has come to Las Vegas 8 times, they will more likely to gamble $1,000. This is common sense. The first time you go to Las Vegas, you're not going to gamble, significantly, unless you're familiar with the games, having played at a local casino. By the 8th time, you're more comfortable with the games. You understand a slot machine. You understand a craps table. So you're more likely to become a gamer after that 8th time. Cosmopolitan, people loved it. And they came back on average came to Las Vegas 1.5 times a year. 1.5 times a year, people came to Las Vegas. That's 4 years or 5 years. So you know that it's going to take you from opening to 5 years to be profitable based on the information that we know about customers. Now it's a great property, it's profitable, it's been tweaked a little bit for gamers, and it's a great place to hang out.
So that 4 to 5 year runtime to get to profitability, I think that segues well into one of your areas of expertise, finance. And you've posted on your LinkedIn, and that's how I read all your stuff. What's another way, just to put a quick plug in? You have a website set?
My website, I post links onto, but I write for Gambling Insider magazine, Gaming America magazine, and Global Gaming Business magazine.
Got it. Okay, so I recommend you guys follow Oliver on LinkedIn, find his website, and then check out those publications.
And Twitter.
Okay, what's your Twitter handle?
Ollie Lovat.
Okay. I've been calling you Lovat. I'm sorry. Lovat?
Don't care.
Okay. All right.
I'm not proud.
I didn't see any sideways looks out of you when I was saying it, so I can tell you take it well. I'm the same way when somebody calls me Chris or Greg. It's just whatever.
I'm Scottish. I pronounce everything in America wrong anyway, so.
All right, so backroom to boardroom, Teamsters to Wall Street to REIT. I love this article. I thought it was a great kind of stroll through the history of Las Vegas with the common thread of being finance and how these big projects were financed. Why don't we, let's get into it. So maybe quickly, let's run through. So the backroom originally was what?
Well, it was the any way a casino could get financed back in the olden days was through less credible lenders than you would have today. So it was the mob money. It was Teamsters Central Pension Fund that was funneled through Valley Bank. And, they, built Las Vegas. It got to a stage, though, however, when the pension funds and the Teamsters pension funds and the mob couldn't afford to build these big casinos. So after after Howard Hughes came to town, Gakorian started investing, and they changed the corporate gaming laws. You started to see third-party investors coming into Las Vegas, but it was expensive. It wasn't like now. You're talking, high-interest loans, high-interest bonds, and then you saw in 1973 Shalom Rickless, who was a fascinating character. He died last year in his 90s, and he was the father of junk bonds as a investment tool. And Rickless was a larger-than-life character. He made movies, he owned casinos, he owned fashion companies, he owned department stores, all funded through high-interest bearing bonds. And what he basically borrowed to buy. He was the leverage. He was one of the founders of the leverage takeover model through bond issuances. And that introduced Michael Milken. Michael Milken used to work on the bond as a bond seller, and he met Rickless, and then Milken used the same debt structure to build Steve Wynn's empire with the Golden Nugget and the Mirage. So a lot of people talk about Milken and Wynn as being the financiers of modern Las Vegas, but Rickless did it 10, 15 years before Wynn did. And when the Mirage proved so successful, the floodgates opened. And I think there were two reasons for this. Number one, with the exception of Jay Sarno, who was a showman, a lot of the other casino owners previously were not big public figures. And there was a perception that there was something shady going on behind the scenes. And there may very well have been. Wynn was a credible figure for corporate America to lend to. Circus Enterprises, Bill Bennett and Pennington, who we spoke about before, was the first casino company to do an IPO in the early 80s. They knew what was coming in. It was people coming and spending $60, $80, filling 4,000 rooms at Circus, and there was a very low volatility model. Nobody was winning $10 million at blackjack, right? The biggest bet you could have put on was like $100. So on that low volatility model, you can finance that because you don't have the huge swings, but also because you know what the margin is in a slot machine, and you can plan week to week what your revenue is going to be. That's a really good model to finance. But when you're financing something like a Bellagio, you have huge swings in volatility. So you needed, the 3,000 rooms of lower volatility play to be able to manage the high volatility play. And that was back in the 80s and 90s. So that was the model then. And you got to remember, these were not international companies. You could have gaming in Atlantic City, you could have gaming in Laughlin, and you could have gaming in Las Vegas and Reno. And that was it. And while other international people tried to come into Las Vegas, they didn't have very good experience with gaming control board and licensing. So it was mainly a closed shop for those, 10 or 12 gaming companies. It's now, 5 or 6, but back then it was much more diverse because there wasn't the money available. If you were Kirk Kerkorian and you wanted to buy Mirage Resorts, as they did in 99, nobody would lend you, $6 billion or $4.5 billion as it was to buy that company. There was no financial system that would lend you that much money. But the proof of the Mirage, Bellagio, Venetian, meant that corporate finance could come in. Now, the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, 2009, made the operators revisit their business model because they were all carrying huge amounts of. They needed to deleverage way to get out of the trouble that they were in financially. If you're familiar with the REIT structure in North America, so you have, if you're an investor and you invest in a publicly traded company, that company got to pay corporation tax on its profits. But if you're a REIT, a real estate investment trust, you don't pay tax on your profits. Instead, the tax is paid by the investor, by the holder of the shares. So things like Simon Malls, most shopping malls and retails are REITs. Office owners are REITs. Logistics owners are REITs, because it's a very tax efficient structure to hold your real estate. But casinos weren't. So if you're a real estate company and you want to borrow money, with the current interest rates in the financial markets, you can borrow money at, say, 3%. If you're a casino and you want to borrow money for your company, you're paying 6%. You're paying double the amount of money to borrow, so double the interest rate to borrow money if you're a casino company than if you're a real estate company. So what you started to see was the separation between the real estate and the operating companies. And that enabled, I wrote that article, about a year and a half ago, and the ultimate conclusion of that was the Venetian selling last week or a couple of weeks ago. The real estate was sold for $4 billion. The operating company was sold for 2 and a bit billion, or 4 and a bit billion, 2 and a bit billion. And that's $6.5 billion. That's the second largest individual asset commercial real estate sale in the history of America. You know what the largest is?
No.
Bellagio.
Wow.
Right? So what you have is big. The irony is 70 years ago, the pension funds from the Teamsters was investing in real estate. Was investing in real estate in Vegas. Now it's the national pension funds that are investing in REITs, which is now one of the casinos in Las Vegas.
So REITs, I mean, pretty much all the big chains they've sold the land and the buildings to REITs, right? I mean, I think Penn Gaming has.
It's an efficient tax structure.
Yeah.
You know, I in the article, I don't know if you can repost the link to the article and
Sure,
in the comment section or whatever, but I do a little, just a very, very simple financial model of I think it's a $3 billion casino. I can't even remember whatever, but I can't remember what I said. The casino, $3 billion casino with $500,000 of revenue on it, $500 million of revenue. It's about a $100 million more profit in that asset by changing the capital structure.
REITs obviously changed the game, unlocked a lot of cash. It seems, and I think you've mentioned it before, it seems like maybe the big tribes that are just printing money in the regional casinos, they are going to get in the Strip eventually. How do you think that will change, whether it's tribes, whether it's more private equity or whatever? How do you see the Strip changing over the next few years?
It's very funny you say that. So my next piece, which I wrote about 3 months ago, which is going to be printed imminently in, I think it's Gambling Insider or Gaming America, is on the future of the Strip in terms of diversification of owners. There's no need for MGM and Caesars to operate 18 resorts on the Strip corridor. There's just no need for it, especially when you look at the contraction of the convention market and the midweek market. To be able to focus on your most profitable customers is where you should be. The old business model of bigger is better doesn't necessarily wash in the new market. There are two things that are happening this year which could be make or break for the future of Las Vegas. Number one is Genting's Resort World, which is due to open in the summer. The second is the Virgin Hotel with the Mohegan Sun casino inside it. If they are a success or successful, it means a great deal. The tribal model is fascinating because you're correct. The tribes have customers and databases, and the opportunity to come to Las Vegas is a very easy market to come into in terms of regulation, compared to other places. if the Mohegan Casino is a success, expect to see tribes looking at Las Vegas, especially with threats, for example, to Oklahoma from Texas looking at changing its gaming regulations. If that happens, then Oklahoma's got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And just look at what happened to Foxwoods. And the American history has not been, how do we say this, looking after the tribes. Can I say that? Is that? I don't know.
You're Scottish. You could say anything.
Yeah. So the American history has not been concerned about Native Americans in the way that it has been about profits. So that's number one. Number two, Resorts World is an Asian company coming in and spending several $1 billion on a gaming project. If that is successful, expect to see at least attempts by other major Asian investors coming in to build casinos in Las Vegas. They have the capital, and the two impediments to Asian investors coming into Las Vegas over the last 20 years have been Steve Wynn and Sheldon Adelson, who have said, we don't want people coming to our market to compete against our biggest players. Well, sadly, Mr. Adelson and Mr. Wynn are no longer involved in operating those businesses anymore. In fact, the Adelson family is right out the door. So the political pressure that those two individuals had, it has gone. And if I'm saying to you, I'm coming in to pump in $3, $4, $5 billion into your economy to create X thousand new jobs, and it's being held up because of the concerns over you guys, the public outcry, I think would be great if Resorts World is successful.
I mean, obviously the pandemic and the recovery from that is a huge variable, and what's tricky is Vegas. More than any other city I can think of, it's like it depends on the ecosystem, because obviously the hotels themselves are beautiful, but like people come for the shows, they come for the fine dining, they come for all the things that make Vegas Vegas, and the shows only work when there's a lot of people there, like to pay for the show and the convent. And so it seems like if shows don't come back, then there's not going to be as many people that come back. And then when shows ever come back, there's that risk of a death spiral. And I'm just wondering, how can they, get where those electric paddles are, where it's like, doom, and get Vegas back to life, where there's that critical mass of people to support all the businesses.
So I'm not concerned about the future of Las Vegas. In fact, I'm very optimistic. This last July, I was tearing my hair out. Couldn't. All the development projects I was working on, a lot of the consultancy things I was working on were kind of falling away. And I sat there going, this is awful. The cities will never recover. And I sat there with a bunch of other guys who are, run other businesses in town, and Dave Schwartz as well. And we did a large research piece called Post-COVID Las Vegas Landscape. When will people start coming back? And we look at the historical recession and recovery of Las Vegas, and then putting COVID into the context of that. And we asked over 1,000 respondents to tell us when you'll be back, will your behaviors change, etc. We believe that over 85%, more than that, like 87% of people will be back to Las Vegas 6 months after they have had their vaccine. I think 2021 is going to be choppy until September. And there's going to be a lot of carnage, because the food and beverage outlets, some of the shows, there's been a lot of pain. 2022 is probably going to be the record year for gaming in Las Vegas.
I sure hope so. And I think, that is a good model. It makes total sense. And I guess it depends, because you talked earlier about, vertically integrated resorts, right? And so as long as now a lot of it has shifted to there's subletting space to different restaurants, and I guess it depends on will all those spots be full, right? As people come back, are there enough entrepreneurs that can sustain this year plus of losing money and be able to come back and ride the wave on the way back up?
So one of the things that I'm working on with a bunch of other people is actually an investment fund to back restaurant operators within casino spaces and also on the Strip, right? You're right. So let's say that MGM has got 20 vacancies from food and beverage outlets or retail outlets because the operators have gone and they haven't been profitable. Let's say it costs $5 million to fit out a restaurant. Okay, and you've got 20 of them vacant. They don't have $100 million, to fit out restaurants. And if they did these other things you could do with $100 million, within your business, than fit out restaurants only to, get the same revenues that you had before. Mm-hmm. So I think, by putting a fund together, and this is something which I'm working with a couple of guys on in the investment world and some restaurateurs from the UK and other places, we can, joint venture with the Caesars, the MGMs of the world, and open, help them create new concepts to go on those properties. So that's the kind of thing I do. I love that. That's the day job. The writing of the history is the hobby.
Well, man, I feel like I could talk to you for another 5 hours just about your hobby, let alone your day job. But I know you're a busy guy, and we're kind of coming up on the end of it. I want to definitely do this again, hopefully in not too distant future, because I could just ask you questions for days, and I love hearing your perspective on things. It's very well thought out, and all the key pieces. So I really enjoyed this. I hope you had fun as well.
Listen, like I said, when I started researching this, there was no one else doing it. So any insights that I've garnered on my way, I'm more than happy to share them with anyone. And if you want to pay me for it as well, I'm happy to consult for you.
Yeah, maybe I can be the first beneficiary of that investment fund you're putting together. So you can pay me, and then I'll pay it back to you for these interviews. Because, hey, the cruise business has not been good. It's been about as good as the Las Vegas Strip the last...
Terrible. It's tragic. It really is tragic, but it will recover again. I'm more optimistic about Las Vegas than the cruise industry, I have to tell you, because I think there's a psychological element of boats and viruses.
Yeah, so. I think for some people, for sure, and because both, the ships are an easy target, because somebody gets sick, it's like shut it down, and then it's the brand. But there are a lot of people that are obsessed with Vegas that are going to be the early adopters, and there's a lot of people that cannot wait to get back on a ship.
Yep.
So
and there's a large amount of people. Look, Vegas had 20 million visitors last year. It was shut for like a month and a half, and there was a pandemic, and 20 million people still came here.
Yep.
That's insane. No international, no conventions. People still want to come here. So, as long as we keep giving people, as we said before, we keep giving our customers what they want, they'll keep coming back.
Amen. And you're going to keep pumping out new articles, and I can't wait to read your article about the resurgence of Vegas and hear about your fund and all that. Oliver, thank you as always for your time. I really appreciate you spent some time today.
Good. It's good to talk. Talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Oliver.